wait for a few more of our audience to come back from coffee, and we'll begin panel 2 in 2 minutes. Beg your pardon? Yes, we've got, yeah, it's 2 online. Marcel and Luciano. Okay, well, the doors have closed. Welcome back, everybody. If I could invite the panelists in panel 2 to make their way down to the front, that would be great. Thank you. No, that's okay. There we are. I think our problem is that the refreshments are too good. So people are still out there enjoying incredible refreshments. Thank you to those people. Okay, now while I've got you all here, I've just got a few announcements to make. I'll probably repeat them later on as well. But just a few things to say, just picking up on the invitation to see the exhibition, the temporary exhibition here at the Museum of Tomorrow. I can confirm that if you want to pop into that exhibition, you just go down to the attendamento area at the entrance of the museum on the right-hand side, show your symposium badge, and they will give you a ticket to that exhibition. So I know I'm going to try and fit that in at lunchtime myself. Second announcement regarding lunch. There is a rather nice-looking restaurant here as part of the museum, and they have agreed a 10% reduction for us, for BBNJ delegates, and that is a kind of bistro that serves para food. It looked good. Another announcement about the Wi-Fi. We do have dedicated Wi-Fi. It will be here very soon, and I will share the login for that after this panel. And finally, we have a panel, and then we have a very special section with a tribute to Christina Gerger. And after that, we're going to have like a family portrait. We're going to get all of the delegates here with us in Rio out into the main hall of the museum and take a group photo. So those are my announcements out the way. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce Andrei Poljak, a man who really doesn't need much introduction. Andrei will be chairing panel 2 about the science policy interface. Andrei.
Thank you very much. It's working. Thank you very much, Hermione. And thank you all for being here and the people joining us online from all over the world. It's been quite an amusement to organize this, and this panel in particular, because one of the things that we have heard from both co-chairs this morning is actually on how the science policy interface into the BBNJ implementation will be taking form. And by form, I mean not just the regime settlement, but also the processes in which science and knowledge systems will be able to inform decision-making and even the progression of the implementation phase of the BBNJ. So I'm very happy that we have combined today with us a great set of panelists with great expertise in each of their fields, including the Secretariat for the BBNJ, but also scientists and people who have been doing science policy interface in the ocean governance for many, many years, and people who are also very passionate about it, as I am. So let me start by introducing you our grand panelists for this morning. First, we're going to be hearing from Charlotte Salpan. who is a senior legal officer at the UN Division of Law of the Sea, Division of the Law of the Sea. That's it, right? For Ocean Affairs, yes, thank you. And Charlotte has been working on the BBNJ Secretariat for many years, since the negotiation has started, and she has a very good expertise to share with us. Charlotte will be followed by David Vousden, sorry about that, who is from the Sargasso Sea Commission and has a lot of good experience as well on the science policy interface, informing multilateral processes and intergovernmental processes. We're going to be joining by Marcel Jaspers online, who is a researcher, will provide us with the aspects of science into decision-making, and then we will be briefly followed by Maria Amalia Rodriguez Chavez, who has participated in the High Seas Alliance and today is in AIDA in Costa Rica and has followed on this issue of the BBNJ forever as well. Maria Amalia will be followed by Luciana Coelho, who is online with us, who just did her PhD on capacity building and transfer of marine technology on regimes, on consent regimes in SIDS. And then we went the panel with words from Sonia Angélica Caicedo, who works at the Sarga Dome project in Mar Viva, NGO that looks at the thermal dome in Costa Rica, which goes from areas beyond national jurisdiction to national jurisdiction. So it's going to be a great set of panelists. So introducing you very briefly so we can actually have time to discuss content, I would like then to invite Charlotte to provide us a few views on your own. So Charlotte, you have been closely involved in supporting the BBNJ negotiations through the Secretariat, which gives you a unique perspective on the process. What changes did you observe over the course of the negotiations regarding the use and influence of scientific evidence? And moreover, how did the role of science evolve from early negotiations to the final adoption of the agreement? The floor is yours, Charlotte.
Thank you, Andre. And yes, I've certainly seen an evolution in the 20 plus years that have supported the process. And I have to, this probably shows my age, but I have to say that the entry into force actually coincided with my 20 years anniversary working at Doha and supporting the BBNJ process. So that was a very special time for me. So science moved essentially from justification for an agreement to the very core of the agreement's architecture. And that evolution unfolded in three distinct phases. So in the early years of the process, scientific evidence primarily acted as a catalyst for an agreement. So delegations frequently referenced scientific findings to underscore accelerating biodiversity loss and the mounting pressures on marine ecosystems in areas beyond national jurisdiction. At that stage, science was largely invoked to answer a foundational question, which was essentially, do we need a new instrument to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction? Essentially, science provided legitimacy and a sense of urgency to act, but the discussions were really framed in political or legal terms, with science largely at that point positioned in the background. But as the negotiations progressed, science began to really shape not just the rationale for the agreement, for an agreement, but the substance of the treaty. So, for example, the development of the provisions on area-based management tools, including marine protected areas and on environmental impact assessments, increasingly drew on ecological concepts such as representativity, connectivity, and resilience, leading to the integration in the text of management tools and approaches such as adaptive management, an ecosystem approach, and the precautionary approach or principle. Similarly, the provisions on marine genetic resources, including the fair and equitable sharing of benefits, in particular those on the standardized batch identifier, would not be what they are without the input of scientists and experts in the field. At that stage, at the same time, another dimension also became visible, which were disparities among states in scientific capacity. So for many developing states, meaningful participation, both in the negotiations themselves and in the implementation of the agreement, really depended on access to data, technology, and expertise. So science, at that point, was really no longer about evidence, but also about equity and an enabler for effective implementation of the agreement, which led to capacity building and the transfer of marine technology being no longer peripheral, but becoming one of the four foundational aspects of the agreement. By the final stages of the negotiations, science was no longer a reference point. It was really embedded in the text of the agreement, including with a view to future-proofing the agreement. And future-proofing the treaty was one of the leitmotifs of the negotiations. So the agreement explicitly anchors measures undertaken under it in the best available science and scientific information, and where appropriate traditional knowledge. In addition, the agreement institutionalizes scientific input and knowledge sharing by establishing a scientific body to support decision-making, a capacity building and transfer of marine technology to support developing the required capacity, and a clearinghouse mechanism for access to information and for information sharing. So this institutionalization really marks a significant shift, because rather than episodic reliance on external expertise, the agreement creates a continuous interface between science and policy, which hopefully will help implementation adapt and evolve as scientific knowledge advances. So in concluding, over the course of the negotiations, science really evolved from a persuasive backdrop to an operational pillar of the agreement. And it moved from justifying action to shaping the design and ultimately to underpinning implementation of the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Eu posso pedir para colocar o slide com o Slido, por favor? So we will be taking questions at the end of the interventions, and we have Slido on deck so people can scan the QR code and provide their questions. So thank you, Charlotte. That was really intriguing, especially for me, who am a passionate person about science diplomacy. That is the perfect example. So David, now, please, to you. I understand you want to take the floor. And David, David tem slide para apresentar, por favor. Not yet. Okay. Ele vai pedir pelo slide.
Yes, okay, yeah, thanks for accommodating me on that, as I'm going to be putting one slide up. I won't be able to see it from there, so I'm going to stand here. It also means I can use my cheat sheet here and crib notes. So as you get older, you can't function quite as fast as some of the younger scientists. It makes me very jealous. Oh, well, it's up now anyway. Never mind. So, yes, I'm very proud to be associated with the Sargasso Sea Commission. We have the Executive Secretary here, David Freestone. But as in my career, so many times I wear a number of hats. So I'm also the project manager for the Global Environmental Facilities, strengthening the stewardship of the Sargasso Sea, which is implemented by UNDP and IOC UNESCO, which is a 5-year project, which is very, very closely associated with the Sargasso Sea Commission. The Commission has existed for some 12 years now, I believe it is, and it's almost coming up to an anniversary, which I'm sure David Freestone will mention when he's up here doing his panel session. It was established by the Hamilton Declaration signatories, which was 10 countries that agreed to collaborate in the conservation and stewardship of the Sargasso Sea. And as I say, you'll hear more from David about this in his panel presentation later. So some years ago, we managed to convince GF to fund this project on strengthening stewardship in the Sargasso Sea. And this project, it's a long, detailed, complicated project, but I can break it down for you. It's following 3 steps or stages to achieve this process of strengthening stewardship. First of all, by capturing the best available science and identifying main threats and impacts to the ecosystem, as well as, very importantly, then identifying where are the gaps in the knowledge. And unsurprisingly, those are quite significant. And then based on that information, we move ahead to develop a strategic action program for more effective stewardship and conservation of the Sargasso Sea as a large oceanic marine ecosystem that recognizes, the strategic action program will recognize the value of the ecosystem itself and its goods and services that it provides globally, the cost and benefits of improving conservation and stewardship, and then arrive at a formal, endorsed, signed agreement for stewardship of the Sargasso Sea, including identifying the partners who are going to work with us on that, on ongoing monitoring and research, and all the necessary support and partnerships for scientific studies. And then part of that process is to ensure broad interaction and engagement with various stakeholders, including the users, the beneficiaries, and the guardians. The users, for example, the shipping and fishing industry, the beneficiaries, all of you out there in the whole world, that benefit from the carbon sink and the carbon pump that is the Sargasso Sea and the heat absorption of the Sargasso Sea, and the guardians, which is probably all of you in this room as well, people who want to see it preserved and conserved and properly managed and stewarded. So those of you who are familiar with the GEF approach to international waters and protection, particularly the transboundary diagnostic analysis and strategic action program approach, will recognize how this has evolved to address ABNJ. When this project was put together, it was before the actual text of the ABNJ agreement had even been agreed. But GEF approved this project on the basis that it was the first large marine ecosystem project out in the high seas and the ABNJ. And rather fortuitously, the two have become very parallel in their achievements. And you ask about the potential tensions between voluntary stewardship and the governance architecture in the actual agreement itself, Andre. I don't see such tensions, only compatibility and mutual support. The process that the Sargasso Sea Stewardship Project is following, which I described earlier, aligns almost exactly with the requirements of the BBNJ agreement as defined under Part 3, measures such as ABMTs, including marine protected areas. And that's the slide I put up there. You'll see that under Article 19, parties shall collaborate and consult as appropriate with relevant stakeholders. And we have a long-term stakeholder engagement strategy. We've actually, and you'll be hearing about that if you come to any of if you come to our side event, we actually hired a consultancy to do the stakeholder engagement for us, and that has proved to be extremely valuable because it kind of bridges the gap between the project and, for example, the industry, the private sector, etc. So they're seen as an honest broker. Also under Article 19, proposals should be formulated on the basis of the best available science. And we took the transboundary diagnostic analysis approach and we refined it into a socio-ecosystem diagnostic analysis because we don't have transboundary politically. We are the Sargasso Sea, we don't have a coastline, we're out there, it's an ABNJ in totality. This CEDA, as we call it, follows the same approach as the transboundary diagnostic analysis that GEF uses, and it captures the science in terms of the ecosystem and the environment, but also the socio-economic aspects like shipping, the fishing industry, the eels, which are worth a huge amount of money. And then once we've done all this, a draft management plan encompassing all the proposed measures and outline monitoring and research that needs to be done, what GEF calls a strategic action program, which will then be adopted by signatories, the Hamilton signatories, the 10 countries, and possibly more. You'll hear more about that later during the course of this week, that agree on the long-term actions that need to be taken to maintain the quality objectives of that ecosystem. We do need to bear in mind that the agreement clearly acknowledges that its decisions shouldn't undermine existing relevant legal instruments and frameworks and other relevant global, regional, sub-regional, sectoral bodies, and that the agreement will promote coherence and coordination with same. And we heard a bit of that earlier, people were talking about the, I can't remember exactly who it was, the RFMOs and how important it is to bring them in. And in this context, the Sargasso Sea Commission and the Stewardship Project is also already working very closely in many cases through formal memos of understanding with a number of the mandated bodies, including IMO, ICAT, the tuna fisheries, NAFO, the North Atlantic Fisheries Organization, the International Seabed Authority, and indeed one or two voluntary organizations like the Global Fishing Watch, all of whom share similar interests. So currently, we are about to start the negotiation process for the Strategic Action Programme, which we hope to have completed, signed and endorsed by the end of this year. Thank you.
I thank you, David. Very inspiring. And I'm also happy to announce that this institute to which I'm serving has also a great deal of the science policy interface, because we're mandated by the Brazilian government to leverage on the best available scientific knowledge and develop subsidies for best decisions, let's say so. So I understand this all to tell you that I understand fully the kind of challenges that we go through when combining what is the best available scientific knowledge. Thank you. So now let's move to Marcel. Marcel, are you online? Can you hear us?
Yep, I should be. Hi there.
Oh, that's great. So we're going to be hearing from Marcel Jaspers from the University of Aberdeen. Marcel, your work highlights both the innovation potential of marine genetic resources, but and also the governance challenges they raise in areas beyond national jurisdiction. What would you say are the key scientific realities of marine genetic resource research that must decision makers understand to design workable implementation measures under the BBNJ? And moreover, conversely, how might the emerging BBNJ regime influence the future of marine biotechnology research, and what should the scientific community prepare for? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm really sorry I can't be there in person today, but I hear it's a great conference, so I wish I could be there. I will take your questions separately. I'll answer the first question first and then work on my way to the second one. So the first thing to realize as a policymaker, I think, is that the economic case for the using of marine genetic resources of areas beyond national jurisdiction is not clear. The reason for that is it's very expensive to collect materials in the open ocean. It takes tens of thousands of dollars per day to charter a research vessel, and that would be very expensive just for collecting MGRs for discovery of new products and processes. So the answer to most questions is, why don't we just collect nearer to shore or even on land, which is much easier to do and much easier to access as well. So then we can think about why it might be the case that we do want to go out to areas beyond national jurisdiction. And that might be because we're finding products that have better performance economically than current products on the market. And that might mean that there's an economic advantage to doing so. The alternative is that the material that we're looking for has an unprecedented performance. That might be, for instance, a drug with a new mechanism of action. And we do know that, for instance, MGR from within national jurisdiction have shown to have new mechanisms of action in treating cancer, for instance. So that is a possible reason for wanting to go out to the deep sea and the open ocean to collect materials for research purposes. And the other thing that is often touted now is that DSI, digital sequence information, is everything. And that's not the case. So there is still the need to collect physical material, physical MGR, as many people like myself who work in drugs from marine invertebrates, for instance, we extract chemicals directly from these without actually accessing the DSI in the first place. So we need to realize that physical access is critical to the work that we do. And that what we do then is, once we discover these chemicals that might become drug molecules of the future, we can synthesize them and their analogs in the laboratory. So again, it's a very different process from the one that people often imagine, in which DSI is used alone to devise new products and processes. There is the case, of course, that digital sequence information is important in certain markets, and I would say that's, for instance, the enzyme market. So if you look, for instance, at your laundry detergent or washing powder, as we would call it, you might find that it runs at 20 degrees or 30 degrees centigrade because the enzymes have been derived from cold-adapted organisms, and those, of course, are very common in the upper ocean and in the Arctic and Antarctic as well. So you might, for instance, think then we're looking for enzymes that have come from bacteria from the upper ocean in a cold environment, and that we have the DSI from those. It's been deposited in a database. And we might, for instance, then say, well, actually, we're going to develop a product out of that. Again, the difficulty with that is you might search a database and find a DSI from another source with fewer restrictions, it has better activity, that you might want to use. So again, it's very the case that you find a single DSI that's needed to be used for a single product. It does happen, but it's rare. Often, the final DSI in a product is hybrid, a hybrid of multiple sequences that are out there. So again, remember that it's not just a one-to-one correspondence. Often that DSI is much more difficult to deal with. And we must remember, DSI is not everything. The original information that we need to derive function out of DSI takes a lot of work. So I can give an example from my own work in which it took 10 years to work out the function of 5 unknown genes from a marine organism. And that allowed us to do work that we do now, but without that additional bench work, we were not able to do that work, and people now learn from our experiences that is annotated in the DSI database, and we can use that information to search for new genes of similar function. So that's the reality. Many genes in the marine environment are still unknown. We don't know what they do, and they have no parallel in terrestrial organisms. Also, the tools to manipulate those genes may not exist. So again, often we don't actually know what they do, and we can't use them very well because we don't have the tools to manipulate them. In answer to your second question, I think the effect of the BBNJ regime on scientists needs to be sold very carefully to the scientific community to make sure that they don't find it an additional burden to their research. And I think the key then is to not create these administrative barriers. And I think at the moment, the system we have built is light touch, which is great. And it builds on existing good practices. So we already see that a lot of the references that we see in the treaty text and the papers that have been written now for the PrepCom see that there are existing databases, good practices that we should build upon. It also means that these good practices means that the data we should build together will be more consistent and more valuable. So again, one of the things we might want to think about is minimal data sets required for the BBNJ treaty. That would help us tremendously in developing better conservation methods and better uses of MGR in a sustainable way. And of course, it's already been mentioned today, but I think it's important that this emphasis on building capacity is critical. It gives an opportunity for many to take part in marine scientific research and have access to MGR and DSI on MGR. So I think that's important that we make sure that we are all on a level playing field and everybody's able to use those new resources in the same way for benefit in their own economies and, say, for instance, the health of their own people. Finally, we need to make sure that the scientific community sees this all as a benefit and not a burden. So we need to sell it in a way that it shows that if we have better coordination of say, research expeditions, better cooperation, have more people on ships working together, and more consistent data, this would be a major advantage of the MGR part of the BBNJ treaty. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Marcel, and I think you're absolutely right. We have to make sure that the scientific community is engaged and is also part of the construction of this new treaty, so it can come out of the paper and become something tangible for future generations even. Now let's pass along to my dear friend, Maria Amália. Ama, organizations such as AIDA, in which you're representing now, and the High Seas Alliance, which you're also representing, have been instrumental in bringing environmental justice and regional perspectives into ocean governance debates, particularly within the BBNJ. So what do you think, how can BBNJ implementation ensure that science-based decision-making meaningfully incorporates equity and environmental justice rather than treating them as secondary policy considerations? Thank you, Ama.
Thank you, Andre, and thanks to you and the organizers for the invitation to be part of this panel today. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I think that when talking about the BBNJ agreement, what it makes it unique is that we aim to ensure protection and sustainability to global commons, but which this global commons has also witnessed equity asymmetries. So I think that previous interventions had indicated that equity is present in the agreement's text. So we have the principle of common heritage of humankind. We have the preamble, which refers to future generations and how states needs to act as ocean stewards. Equity is also present in the ABMT's part 3 when we're talking about the objectives of ABMTs and MPAs in supporting food security and also the protection of cultural values, and in relation to environmental impact assessments when we're talking about economic, social, cultural, and human health impacts. So after this brief reference on equity, I would like to emphasize 2 examples where the future implementation of the agreement could ensure science-based decision-making, meaningfully incorporating equity and environmental justice. The first one would be consultation processes, identified as well as the co-chair Janine and also by Charlotte. And here, I want just to step back a bit and recall what it means when we're talking about environmental justice, and it is understood as this just treatment and meaningful involvement of different people in environmental decision-making. And it refers to fair sharing of environmental rights and duties and the recognition of special circumstances of different actors and states. So one of the many valuable gifts that the BBNJ Treaty brings along to the ocean governance architecture, but also to us as a global community, is how we have now effective tools for coordination, cooperation, and consultation. And that way, we are able to support this transformative dialogue across different views of equity and different types of knowledge. 2 consultation processes are established within the agreement. I will only refer to one of them, that it's regarding the process of establishing area-based management tools, and the consultation process that it comes along in part 3, where we have a variety of stakeholders that need to be consulted in this process. So we have institutions, frameworks, and bodies, or IFBs, as mentioned before in the previous panel. We have also indigenous peoples and local communities, civil society, the scientific community, and private sector. So within the consultation process, this meaningful engagement of stakeholders is a way towards ensuring equity and environmental justice, as these multiple views and different types of knowledge and information will be shared and taken into account in reviewing the BMTs or MPA proposals. Also, the agreement sets a list of elements that differs on the specific or the specificities of these stakeholders. For example, IFBs are called to provide information or of additional scientific data if there are management measures in place. So we have that interaction that I think it was one of the questions in the previous panel, so that we need to really enhance this coordination and consultation with existing regimes and BBNJ. And then the second example that I wanted to showcase as well in how this science-based decision-making can meaningfully incorporate equity and environmental justice relates to observers' participation and rules of procedure. Many observers or non-state actors have been part of the BBNJ discussions for many years, starting from High Seas Alliance, but also the scientific community, universities, private sector, and youth organizations. Through the years, these non-state actors have been working on different action lines, for example, providing scientific and legal expertise, increasing public awareness, sharing information, strengthening capacities, but it also reflects on this long way of involvement of these different sectors, that there are challenges present in some of the regions. For example, the availability of ocean science experts in specific fields of the BBNJ agreement, for example, including emerging activities in ABNJ, such as geoengineering, or identifying regional experts to communicate relatable science to region-specific audiences. Also, we have noticed challenges related to language, because there's a big amount of publications and papers, but are only available in English. So on this specific context, other regions might encounter some challenges and might be hindering the effective and comprehensive understanding of the BBNJ agreement as a whole, but also it could also translate in a lack of ownership in the region. So I think that we should be doing more as well in other languages. And in finalizing, I also wanted to emphasize that now with the entry into force of the agreement, we have discussions under the preparatory committee sessions on rules of procedure. And a very important topic that I wanted to highlight is how enabling observers' participation through such rules of procedure can enhance accountability, brings in diverse perspectives and expertise from a broad range of stakeholders, and fosters trust in institutions. I think that in this context, the development of such rules of procedure that consider the role of non-state actors, including the scientific community, indigenous peoples, local communities, civil society, and private sector, in respect to strengthening transparency, adding expertise, and supporting technical information and resources, is crucial for the effective implementation of the agreement in the future. Thanks.
Indeed, Emma, I thank you. And I'm very happy that we have organized, me and Murray, this program in a way that we have a session for traditional, local, and indigenous knowledge, another session on the so-called IFBs, institutions, frameworks, and bodies, another one on the science and technical body, which is something that I'm really eager to learn more about on how we're going to be developing this. But equity was brought in this panel, particularly because it is one of the first international treaties that actually deals with the issue of environmental justice and equity in the text. So it is somehow a victory for diplomacy and multilateral processes. So now, Luciana, você está online, meu bem?
Tô sim, conseguem me escutar bem?
Lindamente, obrigado. Luciana, thank you very much for joining us. Luciana, I'll get along with a question for you. Your work focuses on amplifying diverse voices and capacities within governance processes that are often highly technical, and to foster the implementation of international law and conservation. From that perspective, and from your own personal view, what practical steps could strengthen transparency and participatory mechanisms within the emerging BBNJ institutional architecture? And where do you see the greatest opportunity to build cross-sector coalitions in the early phase of implementation? Luciana, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Obrigada, Andrei. Bom dia a todos. É uma grande alegria participar desse painel, ainda que de forma remota. É uma grande pena que eu não tenha podido estar presencialmente nesse evento, mas eu estou imensamente orgulhosa por esse evento estar ocorrendo no Brasil, servindo como uma plataforma vital para disseminar o conhecimento sobre esse acordo no nosso público nacional. E claramente, proporcionar possibilidades de diálogos entre a comunidade científica, os policymakers e também a comunidade jurídica.
Lu,
Now let's change to English.
Good, thank you.
I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the organizers for the invitation and congratulate them for convening such a distinguished panel and event. It is a privilege to join my fellow panelists today, and I thank our moderator and friend for facilitating this dialogue. The first question was about looking into the practical steps that could strengthen transparency and participatory mechanisms within the emerging BBNJ institutional architecture. Having served as the legal advisor for the Brazilian delegation during the concluding rounds of the negotiations, I had the privilege of witnessing the historic adoption of the BBNJ Treaty. It was a master class of science diplomacy. And the final text really reflects the rigorous input of a diverse coalition, including scientists, policymakers, academics, civil society, private sector, youth, and traditional knowledge holders. This collective effort resulted in a sophisticated and ambitious instrument. Crucially, it provides recognition for the special circumstances of small island developing states and the special needs of developing countries, while codifying capacity building and the transfer of marine technology with mandatory and standalone obligations. As we transition towards the implementation phase, I would like, the treaty has some lock-ins for their institutional architecture regarding gender and geographical balance and the intake of traditional knowledge, To operationalize this institutional architecture, I would like to propose 3 immediate priorities for the COP. The first one is to focus on the terms of reference for these subsidiary bodies. We must move beyond high-level language, so there is gender balance, geographical balance, the geographical distribution, to more concrete steps to implement or to enable more participation. The TOR for the subsidiary bodies must include specific rules on structure and composition to enable true equitable participation. Addressing practical barriers such as accessibility, language barriers, other infrastructure barriers such as breastfeeding, and all to actually promote gender inclusivity, and detailing how other epistemologies and traditional knowledge will be considered in the work. The TOR must also establish procedures for engagement with stakeholders, collaboration with the other subsidiary bodies, and with institutions with overlapping mandates. Regarding transparency, these TORs should be open to civil society scrutiny to ensure institutional design remains accountable. The allocation of funding resources should also be available to public scrutiny as possible. We also need to move away from box-ticking exercises in terms of participation. We must develop, or the COP must develop quantitative and qualitative metrics to measure the long-term impact of capacity building initiatives and the actual effectiveness of participation. To close the response to this question, the BBNJ Treaty is a landmark for the high seas, but its legacy will be defined by how we translate the text, the equity provisions into functional, transparent institutional standards. The second question was about finding the greatest opportunities to build cross-sector coalitions in early phase of implementation. I would like, in response to that, I would like to name 4 great opportunities for coalition building. The first one lies in the integrated function of the subsidiary bodies, in particular the Access and Benefit Sharing Committee, the Scientific and Technical Body, and the Capacity Building and the Transfer of Marine Technology Committee. These bodies working in tandem with the clearinghouse mechanism will galvanize a matchmaking between needs with global opportunities, such as integrating scientists from developing countries into international research expeditions. So promoting inclusion in marine scientific research, which is very dear to me and to my PhD research. Moving beyond personal connections and expanding other forms of participation. Second, the CBTMT committee should also develop a comprehensive mapping of existing initiatives, avoiding duplication and enabling cross-sector cooperation. Third, the financial mechanism can also provide opportunities for great cross-sector collaboration, allowing for complementarity between public and private funding and public-private partnerships. Fourth, Article 5 and the non-undermining clause in particular serves as a strategic bridge, leveraging synergies and coordination between the BBNJ framework and established competent international organizations, like the IFBs that have been mentioned already. So fostering multi-level capacity building. By fostering multi-level capacity building, we ensure that the BBNJ agreement does not operate in a vacuum, but rather strengthen the existing ocean governance ecosystem and coordinate it, of course. With that, I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Muito obrigado, Lu. I almost thought that you forgot the language, so thank you for that. Let's move along now to Sonia. Bienvenida, Sonia. Sonia, through the Sargadom project, your work highlights the ecological and governance connectivity between coastal states and adjacent areas beyond national jurisdiction. How should the BBNJ implementation better account for ecological linkages between areas beyond national jurisdiction and coastal ecosystems, particularly in regions such as the thermal dome?
Bom dia. Thank you, Andre, and all the organizers for having me here. It's a pleasure for me and an honor to address to you in this morning. Well, the thermal dome, for those who doesn't know much about it, it's a very unique and key site that it's present within and beyond national jurisdictions in front of the coastal of the Central American countries in the Eastern Tropical Pacific Ocean. So I would like to have more time today to explain the uniqueness of this area, but I do not have that time. So I'd invite you to join us to the satellite event that we will have tomorrow at 4:30 and to deepen about the challenges and lessons learned in this journey. But to answer to your question, I would like to say that I consider that hybrid networks of ABMTs, including MPAs, should be established in the implementation of the treaty, where these management tools really reflect the complete ecosystems that we want to protect, to ensure and to guarantee the protection and the continuity of the biological processes that take place in this area, and also the ecosystem services that those ecosystems supports. So this hybrid approach encompasses, and we call it like that because it encompasses the existing area-based management tools and MPAs, but also the ones that will be declared under the treaty. So this is why we foresee a variety of MPAs and ABMTs networks that are really effective and reflect the vastness and the complete processes that take place in the ecosystem in all oceans basin. So also another very important part for this is the institutional cooperation and coordination between all the IFBs and stakeholders at all levels, meaning global level, regional level, and local level. This is a key lesson learned that I would encourage all to take into account when implementing the treaty and when designing the MPAs and ABMTs that we want to establish in the high seas, and always bearing in mind that we have to protect the entire ecosystem. We cannot divide the ecosystem and the processes that take place in there because they are within or beyond national jurisdiction. And this is the way that we can achieve the conservation and sustainable use of the large marine ecosystem that are in all the oceans around the world. I consider as well that dynamic ocean management is a very useful concept that we should consider in the establishment of this network of MPAs and ABMTs to protect the marine ecosystem that are aligned, those management tools aligned with the life cycle of the species and the biological processes that are taking place in there. And just to add other ways that I could see that we could better account to secure those ecological linkages would be that the scientific and technical body could develop detailed scientific information for each ocean, region, or basin to assess the criteria of the ecological connectivity that is set in the Annex 1 of the treaty. So it would be very useful that this STB could think of the way that proponent states should demonstrate and prove how these criteria of ecological connectivity should be met, and to explain in each region with their characteristic and specifications in biological terms how this ecological connectivity should be protected, but also should be demonstrated in the proposals. Another idea that came up to my mind is to think of designing ABMTs and MPAs in the way and with the approach of not the area where these management tools will be established, but with a focus on the species and the ecosystems that we want to protect. And just to highlight the importance of protecting the whole ecosystem and the species that inhabits there, their biological processes that take place within their life cycles, and to secure the ecosystem services that take place in the area. So we cannot fail to protect them, the ecosystems, the species and the ecosystem services that take place. So I would like to see that from the STB. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Sonia. So thank you very much. I'm being now very conscious of time, Hermione. I know that we have 5 minutes, okay? So we can take at least 2 questions. I just wish to have a final round with my panelists here and take their expertise and ask them, what would you think would be one concrete recommendation, essentially to strengthen the science policy interface in this early phase of the BBNJ implementation? And I would like to go back forth. So start again with Sonia, move to Maria Amália, then back online, and then here. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Just very briefly, I would suggest states and governments to go through to shipping industry, because associations and companies, because we have to leverage their capacity, the technologies that they have, and they really proven willingness to collaborate and to protect the marine environment by using their technology and capacity that they already have. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Ama, please.
Thanks, Andre. I think that having a clearinghouse mechanism up and running, it's definitely a key aspect for developing states that wouldn't have access to such information on our own national capacities. But also in making that clearinghouse up and running, I think that we need to consider the limitations and disparities of some countries to access that information. So not trying to level the playing field for access and really using that information for decision-making process.
Perfect. And with a matchmaking exercise, that would be lovely. Luciana, please, online.
Thank you, Andre. Building up on Maria Amália's response, my recommendation is about a well-functioning batch identifier, which is connected to the clearinghouse mechanism. And I think this will need a lot of science policy interface. We should really learn from the experience of existing identifiers and to ensure technical compatibility with current scientific databases, and also ensure that the batch identifier and the notifications obligations will not impose undue administrative burden on researchers, as Marcel mentioned in his intervention.
Amen to that. Marcel, please.
And I can support that very well. And Mariamelia's comment as well about the clearinghouse mechanism. What the scientific and technical body needs to do is to decide on a consistent format for data to be collected by research cruisers, so that we all collect data in the same way. And there's a minimal data set that makes everything consistent. This makes it more valuable and more useful for fundamental ocean research, and allowing us to develop conservation measures and to have sustainable use of MGRs to develop new products and processes. So again, minimal data standards would be great.
Ideal, thank you. May I jump now to David, please?
I was having a snooze because I thought Charlotte would be first. No. Thank you. Interesting. Getting back to Sargadom, Sonia, I think, it's useful to mention here, in terms of science to policy, that, of course, the Sargasso Sea Commission is part of the Sargadom project, as well as the thermal dome. That's where the Sargadom comes from. So we're very fortunate we're getting funding from FEM as well as from GEF. But the reason I mention that is because you've got two distinctly different approaches to BBNJ. You have the thermal dome approach, which is looking at the thermal dome, but in relation to the adjacent countries, as part of a whole system of, for want of another term, I suppose, policy and governance. Whereas the Sargasso Sea project is, as I said, it's the sea with no coastline, is purely BBNJ out there. And that leads to different approaches. You're looking at science to policy. Whose policy? Right now, in your case, I think it's fair to say, I mean, it's very simplification on this, but you have the countries to turn to some extent to help support you on policy. Whereas with the Sargasso Sea, the science to policy is really very, very much focused on the stakeholders. There is nobody out there who's responsible. We have the mandated bodies like IMO, FAO, ISA, and I'm going to be maybe a little bit politically incorrect and say they don't always collaborate and interact with each other very closely. It's something we're trying to address under the Sargasso Sea project. But the one thing we've learned is we have to have the stakeholders involved, and those stakeholders include the shipping industry, the fishing industry, and they have to be in there right from day one, right? You will alienate them if you try and bring them in later after you've had all the discussions. And it's really a case of it's their policy that you're actually affecting, that you're actually implementing, if you like. It's IMO coming back and saying, okay, well, we'll talk to the shipping industry and see, because you have this IMMA for humpbacks that runs right through the Sargasso Sea. We'll talk to them about possibilities for reducing speed or even changing routing, etc. And we talk to the the fishing industry about the need for a more ecosystem approach and the problems with bycatch. Out there on the Sargasso Sea, the actual fishery is very minimal on the high seas. It's about 0.5% of the entire global high seas. But it's fishing top predators. And the bycatch underneath is what they feed on. And that we got no handle on that bycatch. So just to finalize, it's whose policy you're dealing with. We don't have a mandated government policy in the Sargasso Sea, but we do have the policies of the private sector to deal with and the policies of the mandated UN bodies, etc. I hope that's helpful. Thanks.
It is. Thank you, David. So now, Charlotte, please.
Thank you. So I think for a well-functioning science policy interface, you really want the right people in the various relevant subsidiary bodies. So I would really echo the suggestions, comments by the co-chairs earlier, that obviously you'll need the right skill set within those bodies, and that includes natural sciences, social sciences, traditional knowledge, expertise. But I would add one more, which is that you would really want someone, individuals that are attuned, even though they might be sitting in their personal capacity in those bodies. You want someone that's attuned to the needs of policymakers, and that is really able to communicate the science in a way that that is clear and responds to the needs of the COP. Yeah. Thank you.
That is perfect. Dream job, non-reachable, but let's try that. So now we're going to be taking 2 questions because I think that we have, okay, 2 questions. Hermione is very bossy. Do we have any question from the audience? I don't think that's the case, so let's turn to Slido. Ooh, okay. So the question is very tricky. Marcelo, we'll speak later. What are the limits of action and the strategies for reconciling ISA, International Seabed Authority's mining interests with those of preserving benthic ecosystems in the BBNJ? Who would like to take this question? Oh, David would, thank God.
I think because it is a very important, even though it's a scary question. You know, under UNCLOS, Law of the Sea, the ISA was created as a joint body that is there to oversee exploitation, but also there to oversee, you know, through the enterprise, but also there to oversee protection and stewardship. And that's put the ISA, I think, in a very difficult position that it wouldn't have necessarily wanted to be in if it had thought back over time. I'm pretty sure it finds that very uncomfortable position at the moment. But I think, again, it comes down to you know, not hiding behind walls, engaging with them as early as possible. And I know we already have, correct me if I'm wrong, David, we have an MOU with ISA, I believe, through the Sargasso Sea Commission. To keep them on board and on side and to interact with them. You know, you can't go through this process pointing fingers. We need to find a way around that. They're in a difficult position. I'm not sort of necessarily defending how they were created. I think it was it could have done with a bit more thought to put them in that position, but they're in a difficult position. Yeah, but thanks.
Thank you. To that question, I think I would refer to the provisions of the agreement on cooperation. And the agreement really was born out of a need to strengthen cooperation and collaboration for the purpose of ensuring the conservation and sustainable use of BBNJ. It does include extensive provisions, I would say, to operationalize the concept of not undermining, and that run through, you know, ABMTs, EIAs, etc. So I think that's where the reconciliation, if that's a word in English, will happen through the processes that are under the agreement for consultation and for involvement of relevant stakeholders, including various instruments, frameworks, and bodies.
Super agreed. Thank you, Charlotte. Any question from the audience? Okay, we have one here. No, there is a good volunteer who is an ECOP, by the way, and is seeking for good opportunities.
Okay, thank you. My name is Kevin Fleming. I'm here representing an organisation, NLA International. I co-wrote the stakeholder engagement strategy for Sargasso Sea, and also had the pleasure of helping Sonia and Marviva with their engagement with the shipping industry as well. And a lot of that is about conversation and getting your point across in a timely manner. I would make an observation that the human race is getting less patient with each day. How does the scientific community balance the challenges of the precautionary approach with making sure that they get the information, knowledge, guidance, and so on to policymakers and the private sector in a timely fashion to remain relevant?
Thank you. That's a motive of a lot of my work. Alma, would you be willing to answer that? And I would ask Marcel online as well.
Thank you for that question. I think that, yeah, the scenarios are changing fast, as you mentioned, and being able to really adjust like your narrative with scientific information depending on the different audiences is key. And something that also caught my attention on what Charlotte was saying, we need these knowledge brokers. So we can have a lot of scientific information, but if we don't have the ability to really communicate it to the specific sectors, the engagement on decision making will probably doesn't go as far. So yeah, from my simple point of view, I think that it's how you can have all these information, trying to translate it into the specific needs of different sectors, and not only talking about, for example, there are people that will only be there for the protection of species, but then if we start translating that importance on how, if we protect whales, that will sum into benefits for coastal communities engaged in ecotourism. So how we can translate that interconnectivity on how we do protection, but how it also brings economic benefits to the different sectors.
Thank you, Ama. And I must remind that we have something going on called the ocean literacy. It's all about that as well. Marcel, would you like to take a final word?
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure if can you hear me? Yes, you can. No,
Yes.
so that's a very good point that Marimelia makes about this. Learning to speak each other's languages is a really difficult thing to do, and it takes time and trust to do that. So we have to sit in the same room together, we have to listen to each other, we have to be willing to ask lots and lots of questions. And I learned over many years that some of the stuff that I was presenting, for instance, was far too complex in the way that I was presenting it. So I learned over time to moderate what I said, to make sure there was plenty of time for questions, and to learn to speak the language and understand the legal aspects of the questions that were being asked. So I think it's important that we do that, and that we do, again, respect each other enough to learn each other's languages and to be able to communicate effectively across that disciplinary divide that I often see. But it's getting less. I think a lot of the people I work with now are very well informed in terms of the scientific aspects of it. And from my perspective, I'm hoping that I've learned some legal concepts on the way, although I still struggle at times. So thank you.
I thank you. And by this, we must conclude, I'm afraid. Otherwise, Hermione will be really mad at us. Thank you, Hermione. Thank you for all the panelists, and thank you for both of you online.
Thank you so much, Andre. That was a great panel too. I hope you all agreed, and those of you online. Now, not you, Andre. And Maria Malia, can I ask you to stay as well? If your other panelists, just make your way really carefully downstairs. I'm so worried someone's going to fall off. Really worried. Uh-oh, don't do it again.